And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Doing the Work, the first show on the Back Home Network covering IU women's basketball. This is our 101st episode, recorded on Wednesday, January 24th. I'm your host, Jeff Marlow, and I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Kathy Amos. We're also joined by our special guest, Chloe Peterson of the Indy Star. And tonight we'll be discussing IU and the Big Ten as we near the halfway point of the conference season. We will also preview upcoming opponent Northwestern. But as usual, we will start this show with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And for our banner moment tonight, Kathy, I'm going to go back to Sunday, and I'm going to kind of toot our horn a little bit. We celebrated our 100th episode of Doing the Work on Sunday, and kudos to all the fans who helped make that possible. And also, I want to shout out to Eagle Eye here in the banner moment. For those of you who did not get a chance to listen to the podcast yet, Eagle Eye was the winner of our home field giveaway. And our banner moment is brought to you by Home Field Apparel, presenting sponsor of the Back Home Network, who includes the Assembly Call and Crimson Cast. Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products for schools in their existing line. You are bound to find something for you or anyone in your life that just loves great collegiate gear. They're constantly, not only do you get quality apparel, but you are supporting an Indiana-based business that has its roots in the Kelley School of Business. Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME23, that's HOME23, to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME23 for 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. And in news, since we haven't had any games this week, Sarah Scalia was named to the top 10 Ann Myers Drysdale Award candidate list that came out this week. Yarden Garzone was named to the top 10 Cheryl Miller Award candidates list. IU moved up to 13th in the WBCA coaches poll and to 14th in the AP poll. And Mackenzie Holmes was listed on the Big Ten honor roll. And I'm still trying to figure out how she wasn't player of the week when she shot 21 for 24 in 2 wins. But oh well.
I guess maybe was it Caitlin Clark again? I didn't look. I just assumed with her 45 points, that's who I just assumed they give it to her every week at this point.
Probably was, but I'm still surprised. So anyway, we're going to throw it over to Kathy for the Amos angle and get kind of her initial thoughts on with what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, just first off, thanks again, Chloe, for joining us. It's always nice to get an extra voice on here. I'm sure people appreciate having that as well, not always listening to Jeff and I drone on. So glad to have you here, number one. Just excited for how our women bounced back after the Iowa loss and came back and really, even without Sydney Parrish, did a great job on Sunday against Purdue, shooting the 3-ball. And really just doing a great job there, I thought, all around. And just excited to see some of these mid-season or mid-conference season now. We're past the halfway point with the total season of, Sarah, Yarden, and Mackenzie both coming out on these lists. And, of course, super excited for our 100th episode that we had on Sunday, too. Just happy to have made it this long and glad we have some people still out there listening to us that made it possible. So, yeah, just all around a nice, quiet week for basketball all around, I think. Had an exciting game the other night on the women's side with Utah out there pulling off a good upset and over UCLA, and that was a fun game to watch. But in terms of Big Ten, it's kind of quiet, and especially for Indiana. So I think it's probably good with Sydney being out and getting that kind of time to recuperate. So that's kind of what's on my mind today.
Let's throw it over to Chloe and give Chloe a welcome here to Doing the Work. Chloe's been with us before, but happy to have her back here. And Chloe, just kind of your thoughts, not only on kind of the Big Ten season so far, but since we last talked, just how you feel like the season's kind of gone so far, or anything else you want to talk about at this point.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think the season's gone about as I expected it would be for IU so far this season. Obviously, they have their 2 losses to Stanford and Iowa, but those are kind of 2 losses I expected them to get. Probably not as much of a blowout losses as I thought they would be, but there's still something I wasn't really sure IU could pull out in that aspect. But it's kind of been a little bit smooth sailing for them after that, obviously, other than the Parrish injury, which we still don't really know kind of how long that's going to be or how long she's going to be out or what, or how, how bad it is for her. But hopefully for her, it's not that bad and she can get back pretty soon.
Yeah, and Chloe, we asked you a little bit about this off air, but Coach Morin has not had there was no radio show this week. I wonder if that was just pre-scheduled with the bye. I hate to call it a bye, but with the week off, she didn't have a show. Do you know when her next press availability is? Will it be like the day before the Northwestern game? Will that be her next press availability?
I would think so. Usually they have those, they tell us those a day in advance. So I would think tomorrow we would know if she's going to have a press availability ahead of Northwestern, because I would assume they'd do it on Friday. But yeah, I haven't heard anything about Parrish as well, but obviously in a boot and on crutches, putting no weight on it isn't that good of a sign. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Now, you bring up something really interesting, Chloe, because you were at the game, I assume, on Saturday or on Sunday, because you were posting tweets. I think you might have been one of the first I saw who tweeted it out. But so she wasn't putting, really any kind of weight on it, even with the boot and the crutches, huh?
It wasn't looking like it. Like she was standing on both legs, but when she was, crutching to and from the locker room, she wasn't putting any weight on it from what I could see.
Okay. Yeah. Appreciate that, because again, for those of us who were only watching on TV, the first thing we really knew was about a half hour before the game. I think Talia Goodman was another, but I think, you and Talia both, I think about the same time were tweeting out that information about Sydney being in the boot and with that. So, so Kathy, just real quick, I'll throw it over to you. Lexi got the start, and I'll actually come back to Chloe with this as well. I'll kind of go around the horn here. Lexi got the start on Sunday against Purdue, and she played fairly well. Do you think that's who we'll see, assuming we won't see Sydney on Sunday against Northwestern? Right. Who do you think, Lexi again, or do you maybe go a little different route?
Yeah, I think that's probably what we're going to see, because our two main bench players have been Lexi and Lily, and I don't think you're going to have Lily coming in and starting instead of Sydney. To me, that makes absolutely no sense, since she's supposed to be Mackenzie's backup and giving her rest. And Lexi's been usually either the first or the second one off the bench. It's always been between those two, and I think we know how Coach Morin really values her leaders in terms of seniority on the team and the experience, I guess I should say. So I don't see, like, she wouldn't swap out Lene as an example. I think Lene has, rightfully so, need to do some work yet. She's only a freshman, and I don't think she's quite there to be a starter for us. And Lexi, I thought, did an admirable job. I think, again, like we talked about on Sunday, the thing with Lexi that we're really missing is that offensive production and the rebounding. Her defense, I think, has been just fine. It's just that offense and the rebounding that we get from Sydney, that's just such a big goal hole to fill in. And so that will be interesting if this becomes, a prolonged outage for a couple, 2, 3, 4 weeks. How do we really plug that hole in with offensive production? Because, we've talked about Lexi's shot. It's not the prettiest, but she does need to find a way to get to the basket and maybe get some layups and some drives and facilitate getting some more offensive production, I think, from her.
Chloe, over to you. Do you kind of think it'll be Lexi again on Sunday against Northwestern, or could you see it going a different route?
Yeah, I would think it would still be Lexi. At first, I wasn't sure if Jules Lamondola would kind of get the start, because she's Sydney's direct backup. But it makes sense that Lexi would go out as the first person off the bench, and they kind of play more of a small ball kind of lineup for the first couple minutes at least. But I think Lexi has the most experience kind of when it comes to what Morin wants to do. And obviously Morin doesn't use her bench very much as it is. So I'm not surprised she would go to Lexi, who has more experience and would likely become a starter next year anyway.
Yeah, right. Good point. Yeah. So let's talk real quick about Northwestern. We previewed this a little bit on the 100th podcast on Sunday coming out of the Purdue game, but let's kind of recap it real quick, Kathy, and I'm going to, I'll hit the preliminaries here, and then why don't you take a little bit down to the analytics, and I want to bring in, I'll kind of jump in with the analytics. We'll get Chloe's thoughts about some of it too as well, but we want to talk about a new site that we kind of found and we've gotten access to here to give us some help with some of the analytics. But Sunday at home, 12 noon Eastern time start, 11 Central, will be on BTN Plus. For those of you who, not fans of BTN Plus, it's got to be one of the last games probably that's going to be on BTN Plus, I would think. But I will say this, as somebody who's got a son going to IU, possibly he's been accepted at IU, hasn't made his decision where he's going, who possibly may be doing some of those broadcasts in the future. The students do a pretty decent job with the BTN Plus, not all their thought, but Northwestern currently 222 in the net. All right. And then Kathy, why don't you kind of take it from there and just kind of streamline it, however you want. Excuse me, however you want.
We kind of talked already about the history between the two teams. I won't recap that. But jumping down to maybe into some of the analytics, and as Jeff alluded to, we're kind of getting this from someplace called Her Hoop Stats. So in terms of the head-to-head, in terms of the overall rating, IU is 7th versus Northwestern at 239th. Offensive efficiency, IU is 9th on that website versus 174 for Northwestern. Defensive efficiency, Indiana's 8th versus Northwestern at 320th. Tempo, Indiana plays an interesting, a bit slower tempo at 156 versus 109 for Northwestern. Effective field goal percentage, IU is actually first there. So that's kind of cool to see. And Northwestern is 146. And then last, I think I'll leave it here. And then Jeff, if you want to talk about any of the others, we can, but in terms of then on the opposite end, the opponent's efficiency field goal percentage, Indiana is 81st versus Northwestern 152nd. So just kind of a couple quick observations looking at those. I'm surprised, not surprised at the effective field goal percentage. I am surprised we're first on there, but that's really cool to see. I was hoping to see us a little better on the defensive end, but that kind of backs up what we've been talking about, I think, Jeff, all year with the team, where it feels like defensively, they're just not quite as strong as what we've seen in past years with the Indiana teams here. So 81st on, allowing the opponents to have an effective field goal rate there.
Yeah. And before I come back to that, I want to get Chloe's thoughts a little bit about Northwestern as a whole. Obviously, they're struggling a little bit. And as Joel points out in the chat with the workaholics, and this was one thing I was going to point out, they do tend to play a little faster pace. They like to run, especially when they had their good team. So Joe McCowan, their coach, has really not changed the overall philosophy. But Chloe, just kind of your thoughts overall on Northwestern a little bit as we head into the game on Sunday.
Yeah, they've had a couple down years, I think, ever since Veronica Burton left. And I think it was 2021. Northwestern hasn't been that good from what I've seen from them, but still, I think they are a very defensive minded team. That's what McCowan does. But I know he's also been sick the past couple games, and they've had an interim head coach, Tangela Smith, who has been coaching them. So that kind of puts them in another state of flux as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they go against Indiana, which is probably the best team they've played since McCowan went down with his illness, which we also don't know if he'll be back by then as well.
Yeah, and Northwestern is going to come in 7-11. Well, right now they got a game tonight. They're playing at Penn State, or actually tomorrow, I think it is. Tomorrow, yeah. Sorry, I misread the run sheet here. They'll at Penn State tomorrow, going into that game 7-11, 2-5 in the conference. So, and right now Penn State's starting to play better, but we'll discuss them a little bit later as we get into the league. And Chloe, I want to bring you into this real quick, and then I'm going to come back to Kathy on a couple of the things Kathy talked about. You have the run sheet that we shared with you. Looking at the efficiency numbers here and by the way, for those of you Her Hoop Stats, this is one of those things that in the last 2-3 months I've been thinking about, and I hadn't really acted on it. But I was like, there's got to be somebody out there now who's doing a Ken Palm style women's analytics. It just had to be, but I didn't really act on it. I kept thinking, kind of thought, maybe Ken Palm will eventually jump on board and they'll have some women's stuff. But yeah, so I just, over the weekend, I finally started doing some digging. I did some research and I found this Her Hoop Stats, and they are, I won't say they're the best, but they're one of the two or three I found. And I really liked what I saw on their free side. There is some stuff you can pull up for free. and I liked it. We were able to convince Jared. Kudos to Jared and Assembly Call, who really kind of still help us out when we need to fund something. And Jared was willing to get the account for us. So Kathy and I have access to that account now. And there's some neat stuff in there. We're still trying. I don't know how much, Kathy, you've had a chance to look at it real quick, but I've had a chance to look at it a little bit, but I'm still kind of figuring out some of it and some of the nuances. But it looks like there's just a treasure trove of information there for women's basketball. Kathy, real quick, what do you thought? Have you had a chance to look at the site?
No, I haven't had a chance yet, Jeff. So
okay.
I pulled it up for just a little bit the other day and had about 5 or 10 minutes to mess around on there. But no, I haven't been able to look into it as much as you have.
All right. So I'm going to throw it back to Chloe here then. So Chloe, kind of looking at the analytics, like offensive efficient, defensive efficiency. Do any of those numbers for IU surprise you at all based on eye test?
Not really from the eye test. I'm not surprised the field goal efficiency or their effective field goal efficiency is first. That's something, that they're very good at, just making shots, as evidenced by that game where they went 15-15 from the field to start the game. And the rebound rate, obviously that's, I think, the lowest one that they have. And that's not surprising either, because they're not the best rebounding team I've seen.
While you brought that up, Chloe, I'll come back to that, but keep going.
But yeah, as evidenced by, I think it took 9.5 minutes for them to get their first rebound against Purdue.
That's right. It was 31 seconds left. Not that we noted it down, but yes.
I was sitting in press row and I was just like, I was looking at the stats and I was just like, they really just haven't gotten the rebound yet. But I think it was Lexi who finally got one at the end of the first quarter. Yes. But none of the analytics really stick out as, that surprising to me.
I think the one thing that surprises me, and again, you got to remember, there's like 360 teams, but I thought the tempo was an interesting number because I kind of think IU plays fairly upbeat, up tempo, and IU was 156 in tempo. And so that really puts them about middle of the pack. Now, again, they're so efficient that it doesn't, that tempo doesn't play as big a role maybe. But Kathy, did that surprise you a little bit about tempo?
Yeah, when I just read that 156 surprised me for sure. I would have thought it was actually a little bit faster, but so yeah, that does. What is there, about 322 teams?
Now
there's roughly somewhere in there.
It's about 360 right in there. Because I've looked at the net, especially looking at the net when I've been doing some of the updates there on Substack. With the net weekly, I know like Evansville's down like 345, 350, and there's only about 10 teams or so below them.
Right.
I keep waiting for them to be in the bottom 5.
Yeah, the rebounding rate, again, it was 109th. That didn't surprise me either. We've been talking about rebounding all year. And I think, the big concern for us on the rebounding side is the defensive rebounding. If they're shooting at a high clip, that's fine. They don't need the offensive rebounding as much, but allowing teams to get those second, third chances, then you're out of position. It makes you more prone to fouling. I think that's the bigger concern. And that 109th really backs up the story I think we've been telling all year, Jeff.
Yeah, and the thing about the defensive or the rebounding rate, as the nice thing on her hoop stats is that it actually has last year stuff right next to it. They're down about 50 spots, give or take. It's about 50 spots lower than where they were last year on rebound rate. And I think that totally, Chloe, I think that meets the eye test that we've kind of seen all year, that there have been times where this team is, even when Sydney's healthy, and I'll come back to this in a second, where they've struggled to rebound. Not just at Purdue.
No.
So Chloe, you kind of, so probably not a surprise for you, Chloe, that they're 50 spots lower than they were last year.
No, that's not really surprising to me at all. I think that's one of the things they kind of sneakily miss about Grace Berger too. It's something she was really good at doing, and it's something I don't think they were anticipating, really having to make up for. So it was more of her scoring and more of her, pace on the floor. But then she picked up a lot of rebounds as well.
Yeah.
Kathy, I'm going to be kind of interested to see how this plays out over these next couple of weeks or so. Joel is telling us in the Workaholics that the rumor that he is getting that she may be out for up to a month. Is this number going to drop more if Sydney's not available, or are they going to find a way to kind of stay where they're at? Because again, that 100, rebound rate at 109th, it's okay. But boy, it's hard, in my opinion, as a former coach, and I'll come back to both of you, but Kathy, I'll throw it to you first. Hard to be an elite team when you're 109th in rebound rate.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I think it's just that defensive end where we're allowing so many second chance shots and third chance shots. And, Sydney was really one that I think she was leading the team in rebounding before she got hurt. So it's going to be a collective effort, I think, in this case. And I will be interested to see, because usually Coach Morin's philosophy is to try to push the ball down to the other end. And so I don't really see a whole lot of the guards crashing the boards, defensively, and they certainly don't on the offensive end. But again, talking more on the defensive side, because that's my bigger concern. I do see this actually getting a little bit worse with our best rebounder going out. It's not really been kind of a coach's philosophy, if you will, to really send everyone to the defensive board to kind of crash that board. Instead, they're sending some people out to kind of leak out on offense and try to get some fast breaks. So unless they change their philosophy to send more guards to the boards and try to help collectively, I don't see this getting better, especially with Lexi coming in to back up Sydney and not someone like Jules. So I do actually kind of think that it might go down.
Chloe, back to you again without Sydney here. Is this something you're going to keep a little bit more of an eye on, or something that maybe is going to be, because I thought it showed up at Purdue, and is that something that they're going to have to find a way to get better at than with Sydney Parrish not on the floor?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Kathy said, in the sense of they don't really try to crash at all. And I'm definitely going to kind of keep an eye on if it gets worse, because I know it's not really Morin's philosophy of rebounding, but after every game, usually she talks about how she has she has something she wants her team to do, whether it's hold someone to 5 3-pointers or win the rebounding game. And sometimes she says, we won the rebounding game, even though it's by 1. And, you can win the rebounding game by 1, but then in other games you lose it by, I don't even remember how much they lost it by at Purdue, right. But eventually it's just going to keep trending worse for them.
So her hoop stats also is kind of a very Ken Pomish. They give IU a 99.4% chance of winning on Sunday, and the predicted score is 92-53. And at this point, I'm not sure I need a 39-point win. This would be a game where I want us to win comfortably, but I would like to see us be able to get Jules and Lene a little more run in a game like this. Don't you think, Chloe?
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be a game they're going to win easily, because Northwestern's kind of been down, as we've said, for the past couple of years. And I think it would be a great opportunity to get kind of Jules and Lene out there and kind of get them some more minutes, especially since they're probably going to be taking on a bigger role if Sydney ends up being out for a couple more, or for more than just a couple games, because they have Maryland after Northwestern, which Maryland isn't as good this year as they have been in past years, but they're still a formidable team. And then they have Ohio State after that, which is going to be a tough one.
And both those games on the road.
Yeah.
Yep.
Kathy, let's move into this. Let's talk about IU first before we kind of get into the league. Yeah. And obviously IU will be part of the league discussion. I'm going to throw it to you here. Right now, I guess, so far halfway through, and we're not officially halfway, but we're pretty close. What's been maybe the biggest surprise, or the biggest something that's really caught your eye, like I didn't think they'd be as good at, that this team has been doing, or an individual
as good at? Yeah. I think the 3-ball has just been a really pleasant surprise and the good way. I mean, we're just really shooting lights out, I think. And, they were a good 3-point shooting team last year, but I think Sarah in particular was a little bit more sporadic, I think, with her 3-point shot. And it has been a little bit this year, but not the degree we saw, I think, from Sarah last year. And, right now they're second in the league in 3-point field goal percentage at 40.3%. That's just really, I think, a really great place to be. And, they're not far behind in terms of 3-point field goals made, and 4th in the league, where they're making around 18 per game, 8 per game.
18 would be impressive.
No, sorry. They've had 18 games and they're making around 8 threes per game, which even 8 to me is really impressive. And so that has been, I think, a nice surprise that I've seen. Again, not that we didn't see that from them last year. I just think this year it feels a little bit more consistent with Sarah really leading the way for us.
Yeah. Chloe, same kind of question to you. Is there something that's been a development or a surprise, whether it's team or individual here, that you've seen this year so far?
Yeah, I would agree with Kathy on the 3-point range thing. I thought, especially after when Sydney went down at Purdue, that their 3-point shooting would struggle. And I think they had a program record 15 3-pointers that game. So it's obvious that, that's really kind of developed to the point where they have depth other than Sydney. And then Sarah, obviously, she's, I think, second in 3-point shooting percentage behind Madison Layden at Purdue. So, and she's shooting 44% from the field this season so far. So that's really something that she's improved on. And it's something she's always been good at because she was known as 3-point shooter in Minnesota. But it's something I think she kind of backed off a little bit last year coming off the bench. And now she's kind of being in the starting lineup. She's really just gotten the go ahead to shoot it whenever.
Yeah. And I agree with both of you. The 3-point shooting is probably the biggest development, especially for those of us who've been following for a couple of years. That was the one drawback. That was the one, besides bench, one of the biggest criticisms kind of game in, game out was the lack of 3-point shooting, consistent 3-point shooting that they had a couple 3 years ago. Whereas now you feel like it's definitely a strength with that. And I also will say, I think one of the best developments and that I think I've seen is, at least, and again, it's not every game, but I feel like Coach Morin has gone a little bit deeper to the bench. And again, a lot of the games have been games where they can get them in a little more comfortably. But I like the fact that we've had games where, especially Mac, hasn't played 35 minutes a game. Now again, we're in the Big Ten season. She's going to play more minutes, but I like those, but there were games in the past where non-conference games, especially, or Big Ten teams that we could blow out, that they were playing a lot. The Stars were playing a lot of minutes, and this year they're not quite playing as many. And I think that's going to show up later in the season. So that for me is a development I really like. I'm going to go back around the horn here. Chloe, is there anything besides rebounding we've already talked about? So let's take rebounding out. Chloe, is there a concern or an issue that you think this team has going forward that if they want to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, they got to get fixed?
I mean, I would just think getting some minutes for their bench, because when you get into Big Ten tournament season, when you get into NCAA tournament season, I mean, I think IU would play 3 games in 3 days, the Big Ten tournament, assuming they make it to the championship, and then they play every other or 2 games in 3 days, the NCAA tournament. So kind of just making sure, especially with Mackenzie kind of last year about this time or around the Big Ten tournament, NCAA tournament time, is when her knee issues cropped up again. So kind of just making sure that they have the depth on the bench and they kind of get those minutes for their so they can, kind of aptly back up the starters would be the main concern.
Yeah.
Kathy?
Yeah, I think to your point, Jeff, just looking at average minutes per game, we only have 2 of our starters that are in the top 25 in the league. We have Sarah Scalia, who has been averaging right around 31.6 minutes per game, and Chloe Moore McNeil at 30.6. But there's nobody else from Indiana that's in that top 25 in the league, which to me, I think, I don't know for a fact for last year or previous years, but I would think that would be kind of unusual that we didn't have more people averaging 30 minutes or more. We only have the 2. And I think that kind of backs up your point that the coaching staff and Coach Morin has been a lot more willing to play their bench, not just more often, but longer as well. And we see, quite often Lily in particular coming in off the bench for Mackenzie, in the first quarter right away. And Lexi coming in that first quarter and really doing more rotations. And so it's nice to see. I think our bench depth still has room to grow, especially from a production standpoint. But step one is to get them the minutes, right? And so I think we're seeing that. So I'm glad to see that quite a bit. And hopefully, as you mentioned on Sunday, when we play Northwestern, we'll be able to really up their minutes quite a bit in that game if it all goes to plan, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with those two things. And Mike, one of my concerns though is free throw shooting. And I'm not sure it can get easily solved, but when you're 13th or 14th in the league in free throw shooting, that's a concern because tight games at tournament time, tournament games, especially once you get past the first round of the NCAA tournament, second round, regional, semi, regional final, those games often come down to who makes free throws. And
we are second to last now, Jeff, and free throw, not by much.
Yeah.
Michigan's 69.1 and we're 69.9. So
I think that went down from last I checked. It was 11th.
And 11th isn't great. So no. I'm going to throw it around about a couple individuals. Kathy, we'll come back to you as we kind of keep going around the horn here. Just give us your thoughts about Chloe Moore McNeil, and especially now with Sydney out. We've talked about Chloe throughout the year, obviously, but just kind of your overall thoughts about how Chloe has played and maybe how her game maybe changes slightly if Sydney's going to be out for an extended period of time.
Yeah. So I think Chloe's doing Chloe things that she's been doing, that we really saw from her last year when she really had to step in for Grace, and she just picked up where she left off and then some. Chloe again is leading the league in assist to turnover ratio at only 2.8. So she's just really out there running the offense. And then obviously on the defensive side, we almost always see her get the hardest matchup, assuming it's a guard or somebody not down low that Mackenzie would be guarding. I think she's always getting that tough defensive matchup too. What I think we've started to see from Chloe is, Coach Moore and kind of, talked about it in one of her post-game press conferences where she needed her to be more aggressive offensively and getting buckets, not just sharing the ball. And I think we've seen that as well. And we just saw it at Purdue, right, with her career high of 20 points. And I think that's what we're really going to need from Chloe, as much as she's already shouldering for the team between facilitating the ball on the offensive end and then the tough defensive matchup on the other end. I just think that unfortunately with Sydney out, like we were talking about, that offensive production has to go somewhere. And to me, Chloe is one of the natural people we're going to see have to ratchet up. If we're really going to be able to fill in that gap for Sydney.
Chloe, your thoughts about Chloe?
Yeah, I think the same things. Obviously, at Purdue, they only had 2 bench points, 2 points from Lene. So it kind of went all to, or there were no points from Lexi either. So it was all of the points other than 2 went to the 4 main starters. And that was because Chloe could kind of, get her career high. And I think with Sydney being out, Chloe will be able to get kind of more shots up because, Sydney was someone Chloe could always trust to pass to, and she'd find a good shot. But now I think Chloe is more taking those shots for herself.
You don't think she's going to do that with Lexi?
I think it'll probably be a little bit less. Sydney was more established,
She might be willing to throw it to Lexi. Lexi just may not shoot it.
Right. Yeah. I hope not. No.
Let's go back around again the other way here, and let's talk about somebody who had a really good game at Purdue, with the exception of some turnovers. But has kind of been a little bit of sophomore slump here in the last 3-4 weeks, and that's Yarden Garzone. And Chloe, you get to go to more games than Kathy and I do, and so you get to see a little bit more of the players, personally. And there's just different things you can see when you're at the game than when you're watching on TV. Just kind of give us your thoughts about how Yarden's been playing, and if you feel like maybe the Purdue game is going to be able to jumpstart her, especially again, maybe Sydney being out. I'm not saying Sydney's taking anything away from her, but there is now going to be more of an emphasis. I think Yarden understands I got to pick it up a little bit.
Yeah, I know Morin mentioned a couple games ago, obviously Yarden has been going through a lot with the war in Israel. And I think Morin insinuated that, that kind of ratcheted up a little bit in the past couple weeks, and that, she's been struggling kind of because she's had a lot of things on her mind. But I think in the past 2 games, Yarden has really, kind of gone back to her old self. She had 3 3-pointers at Purdue, I believe, 3 or 4. And then she's kind of looked less frustrated on the court because I think a lot of it, she was just making mistakes and then having kind of some dumb turnovers that she could have avoided. But I think at Purdue especially, she kind of got back to where she has been. since last year and earlier this season.
Kathy, your thoughts about Yarden?
Yeah, I agree. It kind of feels like, other than a few really humongous games, she has kind of had that sophomore slump. And again, I would have to, pull up the numbers between last year and this year to really back that up. Maybe she was not quite as consistent as my memory is wanting her to be last year either. And so, but still she's, we have 3 players in the top 25 in the league in terms of made 3-pointers. And she's one of them. She's 16th in the league at averaging 1.7 threes per game. I think the reason why we're probably talking about it in this kind of, I don't want to say negative tone, but at least neutral tone with her is that it's not consistent. She'll have a game where, she'll just go for 3 or 4 threes. We saw that in one of the games down in Fort Myers, the Purdue game here where she just had a lot of threes, and then all of a sudden she'll kind of disappear on us. And so, I think that she's not paying poorly. It's just, again, it's not that consistent. But again, is it fair to her to say we need her to always be making 2, 3, 4 3-pointers when you also have Sarah on the team as well, or Sydney when Sydney was healthy too? So, I think Yarden has been doing a fine job. I'm not concerned about her at all. It would be nice to see a little more even and consistent scoring from her if I was going to nitpick.
Yeah, I think you both, it would take the thoughts I would have. Just a lot of things going on for that young lady, and then also trying to play basketball, go to school.
Yeah.
And then, but I agree with Chloe. I think there's been a little bit of some frustration, and because she just knows she's capable of playing better. And when you make some of those turnovers that are sometimes simple turnovers that better, and that frustrates you even more, and such. So with that, that's kind of, do either of you have anything else you want to bring up about IU here, just in context of IU? Otherwise, I'll move on to the league.
No, I think I'm good.
All right, so let's talk about the league. First of all, before we get kind of too deep into it, Chloe, I'll start with you. Surprise in the Big Ten, good or bad? I mean, a team that has overperformed what you thought they might, or a team that's underperformed?
I think Minnesota has been a good surprise for the Big Ten so far. Obviously, they had that loss to Wisconsin, that 3-point bad loss yesterday. But since then, they've surprised me with how they've actually kind of been competitive in most of the games they've played so far. Because last year they were kind of just down in the dumps of the Big Ten, and it was kind of seen as an easy loss or an easy win for most other Big Ten teams. But this year I think they only had 1 loss through non-conference play, and that was UConn, which they played them pretty close. Right. And then they've been pretty and then they've been pretty solid throughout league play so far, other than that loss yesterday.
Right.
Kathy?
Yeah, Minnesota would have been one I would have said. The other one I would say is probably Michigan State. With all of the new players coming into that team, I didn't think they would gel quite as well as they have. And, maybe people might be surprised to hear me saying that with where they're at in the league. They're sitting at 3 and 4 and 9th in the league, but I think they've played some teams really, really tight and really close. We talked about them, with the Iowa game when they were on the road to Iowa. If I remember, that game went into overtime, and it took overtime for Iowa to beat them at home. But if you look at their net ranking, they're 19th. And so it's come down a little bit since league play has started, but not a whole lot. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see Michigan State actually climb up a little bit from that 9th spot that they're in. I just think they probably played quite a few harder games than earlier in the league. Like tonight, they played Purdue tonight and beat them 97-70 already. And just another update, Michigan is losing at home to Maryland. So I think the surprise to me, though, to answer your question, is Michigan State right now.
I agree. I think especially on the positive side, those two teams are kind of a surprise with that. And with Michigan State winning, they're going to rise up to 4-4 and be tied with Minnesota in the league. Right now, Michigan's losing. They'd slide back to 4-4. And I'm going to come back to them in a few minutes. But I'm going to go kind of the other way. And then I want to get your guys' thoughts as well, because I do agree. I think Minnesota and Michigan State are a couple of surprises that we didn't see. I got to say, Illinois, for me, it's Illinois and Purdue. and because I thought that Illinois was a team that was going to be a top 5, top 6 team in the league. I thought Purdue had a chance to be, possibly in that top 5 or 6 at 5th or 6th. And right now, neither of those. And again, Illinois 2-5 in the league, but they host Ohio State tomorrow night. But I just think those two right now are probably the teams that are toward the bottom of the league that, to me, are surprising because again, they just haven't performed. So Kathy, what are your thoughts about Purdue and Illinois?
Yeah, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head with both of those. I would have absolutely expected both of those teams to be kind of more towards the middle of the pack. Definitely expected them to get into the NCAA tournament. And right now, I don't think either one of them are projected to get in. Illinois is sitting 56th in their net ranking, and Purdue's down to 79th. And that was before their loss tonight, which is absolutely not going to help their net ranking at all. And they're going to probably slide even more. So those two are very surprising to me in terms of where we thought they would be higher than what they are at currently.
Chloe, your thoughts about Purdue and or Illinois?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised about both of them as well. I thought Illinois was kind of going to be more of a dark horse in the league, and they've kind of just fallen apart. And with Purdue, I was a little bit skeptical of them because I know they only had 5 returning players. So I was kind of skeptical on how that would all gel, but it obviously seems like it has not worked out too well for them so far. And I mean, another team I'm kind of surprised about is Rutgers, where I didn't expect them to be good, really, but I didn't expect them to be 0-8 in the league bad.
Yeah.
Kind of with all the, with, them being known as such a good defensive team under C. Vivian Stringer for however many years. It's kind of jarring to see them just go to 0-8 2 years after she's retired.
Yeah. And kind of to add on to your point there about, Purdue did have a lot of, lost some people, but Illinois didn't. So I agree with you, Chloe. I think Illinois is definitely between Illinois and Purdue, the more surprising one. I think Illinois had one of the top 10 most minutes returning in the country, not just definitely in the league. I know in the league they had the most minutes returning of any team. And with as well as they did last year, I really thought they would actually take another jump forward and be kind of knocking on that, door for 5th or 4th even. Really didn't expect them to be down here in the 10th range where they're currently at.
Yeah, and I'll chime in here on Illinois too. I think, and Purdue. These were both tournament teams last year. That they're now, barring some, big turnaround, are probably going to miss the tournament this year. With that, so let's talk a little bit because the league has started to kind of separate at least at the top of it. And Kathy, I'll throw it to you. Iowa, Indiana, Ohio State virtually tied. Right. Ohio State will play a game tomorrow night at Illinois. If they win, it'll be a 3-way tie as we head into the weekend. And we kind of said this in the previous show for people who have not listened to us all along and they're just kind of catching on to us now here kind of since the season started. Kathy and I, we were both kind of in agreement that we felt Ohio State talent-wise, Ohio State may have the most talent in the Big Ten. Now, whether that will translate to the floor, but that's why they beat Iowa. They've got the talent. So just, overall, you look at Iowa, Indiana, Ohio State, how you kind of see it shake out from there? Do you see those, first of all, do you see those 3 teams still being the class of the league as we get to the end of February? And how do you think it shakes out?
Yeah, I do. I think those are going to be our top 3 teams. Honestly, the way Iowa has looked, I expect them to probably win the regular season conference title this year. And I think it's going to be Indiana and Ohio State kind of battling for second. I would say if Sydney really is out for any period of time, longer than just a few games here with the games that we have coming up, I think Ohio State grabs that second spot from us. I think we're going to end up dropping some games we didn't expect to without Sydney. We're just not as deep as we, even last year when Grace went out, we had Sarah at the time was coming in off of the bench and we had, basically 5 starters that were, yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay. Well, yeah, because at least on my screen, you froze up for a second. So go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, all right. Yeah, all I was saying is I just don't think this team has the depth behind Sydney to really be able to have her out for a prolonged amount of time like we did with Greats last year and kind of weather that storm. So I think to me right now, if I'm going to be a predicting person with the top three, I'm going to put it Iowa, Ohio State, and then Indiana.
Chloe, your thoughts on those top three teams?
Yeah, I agree that Iowa's probably going to run away with the conference title. I could see them maybe dropping game to Indiana depending on how loud Assembly Hall is when they come on February 22nd, but it's also Iowa's kind of used to that at this point, so I don't think it's going to phase them that much. And then I agree with Kathy that it's kind of going to all come down to will Sydney be healthy for these big games against Ohio State, against Iowa, kind of coming up in the next month, because if she's out for a month, she's going to be out for both Ohio State and Iowa, and that's really going to hurt their depth. So as of right now, with what we know about Sydney, I'd agree with Iowa, then Ohio State, then Indiana.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both of you about how that shakes out. Now, I will say the but here is if they can get, even if Sydney misses some significant time, if they can get through these next three games 2-1, and ideally I would think winning at Maryland would be the second game and then a loss at Ohio State. Yeah. Their tougher games come back to Bloomington in February. A lot of their tough games. So again, maybe without Sydney, the crowd can kind of help get them over that hump. I think Iowa is now the team to beat, although again, going to be a tough thing to do, but Ohio State has a chance to go on a run. If they beat Indiana and Columbus, I think they still have to go back to Iowa City,
that's the season closer.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But they've got a chance. They'll be favored pretty much in every game from there on out. But Iowa has to come back to Indiana. And again, like Chloe said, if the Assembly Hall crowd, that sold out crowd, can really, help them and push them over, I could see this be even these top three getting down into some tiebreaker scenarios of how it's going to, be 1, 2, or 3. But I do agree. I think at least on paper right now, I would go Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana. Let's move into the next tier, and that's Nebraska, Maryland, Penn State. I'm going to leave Michigan out of this discussion because right now they're losing. So that would drop them to 4-4 league. Let's look at the teams that have 3 losses. Those 3, Nebraska, Maryland, Penn State. What do you think of those 3 teams, Chloe? And how do you think, and who's the better team at the end of February? Who's the 4th place team out of those 3?
Yeah, I think Nebraska will be the 4th place team out of them because they've kind of I figured they would be good, but they've kind of surprised me with, how they've been competitive in every game and won a couple of good games so far. But then Maryland, they're kind of on a down year. Obviously, they're still in the upper half of the league. And then Penn State has also been a little bit surprising to me. They were ranked for a singular week before they lost to Princeton, but I think it'll either be Nebraska, Maryland. They could be interchangeable at 4, and then Penn State will kind of run below them. But Penn State being in the top half of the league is kind of a good sign for them.
Kathy?
Yeah. I honestly, I'm pretty high on Penn State right now. I think the rest of their schedule I was just kind of pulling it up to look at it. I think it stacks up pretty favorably for them, other than, they do have to go on the road to play Iowa in February. But that's, I think that's the only time they play Iowa again this year. So they don't have 2 games with Ohio State either. And that one is at home for them. I think their schedule is shaping up pretty well. And with both Marisa and now Owusu back, they were already playing pretty well before Owusu came back. And that's when they ended up dropping a couple of those games, was when Marisa left. And then, she's back now. I think they're playing much better. I would really keep a close eye, to me, on Penn State of those 3. And I think between them and Nebraska are probably going to be the ones knocking on that door for 4th place. I just think Maryland's been a little bit too sporadic, but I also wouldn't count out Brenda Freese's coaching. But I'm pretty high on Penn State this year. So I'm going to kind of maybe slot them in really close to that 4th spot, if not actually overtaking it.
Yeah, big key there is, can Penn State win on the road? They've shown they can beat the teams in Happy Valley, but can they, now that Owusu's playing and they've got Marissa back? They lost in Bloomington. Now Owusu didn't play that game, but they weren't able to get the win with Marissa playing in Bloomington. So can they go to Ohio State? Can they go to Lincoln? And again, I don't know what all they go to. I'm not looking at their schedule. But I agree. Penn State's the one to keep an eye on. I think they are the one that could surprise, but I'm with Chloe. I think Nebraska ends up in that 4th spot just because we know what they can do in Lincoln. And they're always very good in Lincoln from that standpoint. Let's go down now to that next group here that's going to kind of all be bunched in with 4 losses. That's Michigan, Minnesota, and Michigan State. And again, right now, Charlie Cream has 9 Big Ten teams in his bracketology, and those 3 are part of it. Do you see those 3 teams staying in the bracket, Kathy?
I don't know that all 3 are. I thought that having 9 teams from the Big Ten, as deep as I think it is, I feel like that might be a bridge too far for me. I think that, one of those teams in particular, at least one, if not 2, are going to slide out. Again, if I'm picking between the 3, I'm pretty high on Michigan State, even though they're 4th right now. I'd have to pull up their schedule to see what they have left on there. I know they've already played Iowa on the road, and they've had some other tough games. So I think Michigan State could probably move up in those rankings there between those 3 in particular. And I think they make the tournament if they can kind of hang on for the rest of the year. But while you guys talk, I'll pull up their schedule. I might change my mind.
Chloe, what do you think of those 3? Can all 3 stay in the bracket?
Yeah, I agree with Kathy. I don't really think the Big Ten's going to have 9 teams in the tournament. I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch. But I did just pull up Minnesota's schedule, and they play Iowa twice. Still coming up, and then they play Ohio State as well. And I don't know if that's 3 guaranteed losses for Minnesota, but it kind of seems like it. So yeah. I'm a little bit less high on them now that I see the end of their schedule. But I do think Michigan State has made a really good kind of run, especially with, all the roster turnover they've had and their new coach. So I think however Michigan State and Minnesota shake out, one of them could kind of be that surprise team or that final Big Ten team in the tournament.
Yeah. I'm going to stick with my Michigan State. I mean, they do have us and Bloomington, and they do have Ohio State right after that. But otherwise, almost all of their even away games are games that are probably quite winnable for Michigan State. So I think Michigan State kind of moves up on that list.
I'm with you guys. I agree that Michigan State's probably going to be the team that stays in there. I'm a little, and Minnesota can be kind of, like Kathy said, sporadic, kind of be a Jill Jekyll and Hyde. The team I think that falls out, that I think and 2 of them may end up falling out. I think Michigan's the team that will backslide toward 8, 9, 10 in the league. And so I'm not as sold on Michigan just because, and I've been kind of trying to pay attention here. That game is now, that's a 1-point game. Maryland's up 67-66 in Ann Arbor, but they go to Illinois, blow them out. And we thought that was a huge win at the time. And Illinois has since been Illinois, but then they lose games at home, and they beat Ohio State at home. They beat Ohio State in Ann Arbor, but then they lose other games at home. So I'm a little less bullish on Michigan. I think Michigan State makes the tournament. Minnesota to me is kind of the bubble team in this group. Can they get enough wins? Because like Chloe said, that's probably 3 losses there. Can they find enough wins? Because their net is at 31. They're going to stay with the teams they play. And that's the one thing, other than the bottom part of the Big Ten, the teams they're playing, even if they lose, their nets aren't going to drop a ton. So Minnesota to me becomes kind of that classic last four in, first four out team that we're going to be looking at come to selection Monday or whenever it is, selection Sunday. I can't remember how they're doing it now. Let's look at the bottom.
It's Sunday, right after the men's show.
All right. Let's look at the bottom, kind of start here looking at the run sheet from Illinois down to Rutgers. And actually, let's go Illinois to Wisconsin because I'm not sure Rutgers right now at 0-8 is going to be in the discussion. Kathy, is there anybody in that group that can play spoiler to those top three teams?
Maybe Illinois, if they can finally put it back together, right? Like if some of those middle teams still have Illinois on their schedule, I could see Illinois maybe upsetting. I don't know if it's an upset, but surprising them, I guess, if you will. But that's just, again, because of their experience, but boy, they haven't shown it this year. So I wouldn't bet a whole lot of money on them. They would be about the only one of that group of five that I would think could do anything.
Chloe, your thoughts on that bottom group?
I would actually kind of say Purdue might be able to kind of surprise someone, maybe like how they did with Indiana. Obviously, Indiana eventually pulled away in the second half, but if Purdue could come out and play like they did in the first half against Indiana, but sustain that throughout an entire game, that could kind of surprise, maybe not Iowa or the top three, but one of the kind of middle teams of the conference, so they could get one of those surprise wins.
And that's other thing. That's a great point, Chloe, that I didn't even think about till you kind of started going down that path. Those teams that we just talked about, the Michigan, Minnesota, Michigan State group, I'm not sure they can afford a loss to those teams in the bottom part of the Big Ten. I think those, right. And so that's a great point that the spoiler doesn't have to mean the top three. It could be those bottom three teams that are hoping to make the bracket that, they can't probably afford a loss to a Wisconsin or a Northwestern. Right. And again, Minnesota just had that, but I'm on the Illinois. I think Chloe brings up some good points about Purdue. I want to think that Illinois at home is still somewhat dangerous, but again, they're running out of opportunities to show that and do something with it. So it'll be interesting to see if any of those teams at the bottom can make a little bit of a run to get themselves eligible for like the WNIT, because right now they're not looking very good for Selection Sunday at all. I mean, they're not even right now in the bracket mix. So right. Anybody got anything else they want to share, Kathy or Chloe, about the Big Ten in general? I think, I think we covered quite a bit of what I wanted to hit on.
I think we killed it. It was great.
Yeah, we did kill it. That was awesome. Just real quickly here, we've mentioned this last night. Wisconsin, a 59-56 win at home against Minnesota. Tonight, Michigan State, a 97. And again, this is one thing. Michigan's put up points. You talk about the net ranking, Kathy. Yeah, I believe helps. The net rewards teams who score a lot of points.
Yeah, and big margins.
And big margins. And Michigan State has scored over 90 several times this year. So 97-70. And that game at Ann Arbor was 67-66 with under a minute to go. Still there. They're probably having a bunch of timeouts and reviews and all those things. They're going to take like 10 minutes to go. Oh, hey, by the way, Chloe, real quick, speaking of reviews, you were at the game on Sunday. Did you have any, when they did that review on Chloe's 3, were you wondering why? Because I was watching on TV and I'm like, that wasn't even close to a shot clock violation.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, but I don't know. I didn't even notice they were reviewing it at first but it was surprising to me because I thought it was like well in the air before the shot clock went off.
Yeah, I agree. So real quick, we'll go through the rest of the schedule here before we kind of close out our episode. Tomorrow night, we mentioned this already, Ohio State at Illinois. Saturday, again, this is a game in that group we were talking about. Michigan goes over to East Lansing to face Sparty, and then Nebraska at Iowa. Now, I'm not sure Nebraska can beat Iowa in Iowa City, but they do have some size inside with Markowski, and it might be an issue where they can give them. And Stolke and Chloe, I don't know how much you've been following it, but Stolke had a little bit of a knee injury over against Ohio State, so that will be interesting to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, so we're all going to be Cornhusker fans on Saturday. That's what I just heard, Jeff.
Yeah, pretty much. And then Sunday, while Maryland, Penn State, Ohio State at Purdue. That Maryland-Penn State game, talking about that group that's playing for 4, 5, and 6, could go a long way to determine that. And then Minnesota goes to Illinois. So we kind of go around there. So let's go around here real quick. Chloe, you're our guest tonight, so we're going to let you go first. Your final thoughts about the Big Ten and Indiana women so far here at the halfway point in the Big Ten season.
Trying to think. I think Indiana has or I guess the thing that I've been thinking about Indiana lately is that they're obviously able to beat the teams they need to beat, but kind of to get back into the national conversation, they need to, beat those big teams like Iowa and Stanford, which they obviously haven't done. And I think Indiana really wants to get back into the national conversation, but they're going to have to kind of figure out how they're able to do that with the kind of little high profile matchups they have left with Ohio State and Iowa. But that's just my thoughts.
Kathy, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I think, Chloe, I think you nailed it. I agree. They had a couple of really good marquee games, and they've not shown up for them. So what are they going to do when they go on the road to Ohio State here pretty soon, and then having Iowa come into town? I hate overemphasizing the loss of one player, but I really do think that the loss of Sydney is a really pretty big hole for them to fill. And maybe we don't see it against Purdue. Hopefully we don't, miss her as much at Northwestern either. But I think going on the road to Ohio State and Maryland in particular, right after that, if it's not looking good for her to come back, I think those are two potential games we drop. And if we really don't have her back from Iowa, I just think that Iowa is a little bit deeper than we are. I think that we end up dropping that game too. And I think that's going to potentially drop us out of the talk for hosting for NCAA too. So I think there's some really big, potential here for this team, but they're really going to have to figure out how to fill that hole for Sydney in terms of rebounding and offensive production that she brought to us on the floor. Can they do it? I think they can. It's just going to be a group effort. So, yeah.
I think we're going to be there at the end. I agree with Chloe. I think if they really want to kind of get back into the conversation, they really a win at Ohio State or beating Iowa in Bloomington is how you get back into the conversation. Yeah. But I predict at the beginning of the year they would lose in Columbus. I still think they can win in College Park and go to Maryland and win there. Mm-hmm. But obviously without Sydney, it becomes a little tougher with that. Speaking of which, Maryland and Michigan are going to overtime, 67-67. So they're going to overtime. Unfortunately, we don't play them like this weekend. Otherwise, I'd say have 3 overtimes and tire them out with that. So, hey, Kathy, why don't we get some Bob Thompson music and we'll wrap this thing up.
Sounds good.
So if you want, we'll be back on Sunday. And by the way, Brandon brought this up in the Workaholics brand. For some reason, we had it wrong in the run sheet, but it is correct. It's a 2:00 Eastern time start on BTN Plus, 1 Central time, 2 Eastern, 1 Central. We think we said 12 and 11. I think we added a 1 there when we were doing the run sheet. So that's probably my fault as I was putting times in. So our next show will be Sunday after the Northwestern game, the post-game show, approximately 4 Eastern, 3 Central here. You can be here. If you want to watch us do the show and be a part of the live chat, the Workaholics, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@, and that's the @ symbol, @Back Home Network, youtube.com/@Back Home Network. You can be a part of our private community as well. Find out more at assemblycall.substack.com. Special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logos. And a big thank you to Bob Thompson for our music that you heard through the broadcast. I want to thank Chloe Peterson of the Indy Star for joining us again tonight. We hope to have Chloe on again before the season's out, if not a couple times, because Chloe, you bring an excellent perspective to the broadcast. So I hope you enjoyed being with us this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We want to thank all of you guys for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you on Sunday. Until then, keep your elbow in, your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
All right. Great. Well, thanks again, Chloe.
Yeah,
I'm glad you were able to join us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll ask both of you, because Kathy, you're out in Iowa, but you got any fog tonight?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Fog everywhere.
Yeah, it's fog here. I don't know what's like in Indy, but
well, we had 22 inches of snow that's now deciding to melt. So it's got to go somewhere, and the ground's too frozen. So,
and we had ice.
Sky.
We had ice the other day up here. We got out of school early Monday because of the ice. And then I had to go to a game last night, northern part of the county here, up to KV and Kankakee Valley. Man, I'm telling you, it was so foggy last night. It was a good thing I knew the road, because I would have missed a couple of the stop signs if I didn't know they were coming up. So, but I don't know. Is Indy getting some fog there, Chloe? Have you looked outside?
Yeah, it was really foggy yesterday. I went to Purdue for the game against Michigan last night, and coming back, it was kind of the same thing as you, where I could barely tell where I was going, and then it started raining too, and I was just like, hopefully I make it back.
I know this is not a Purdue men's broadcast, but or podcast, but I didn't get to see any of that game last night. But from my understanding, Michigan was bad.
Oh yeah, they were not good. I think Purdue went up like 23-10 at the 15-minute mark of the first half, and then I don't think Michigan got within 10 points the rest of the game.
All right. So hey, we're going to get out of here. Chloe, appreciate you being with us, and we'll get you back on again here when we can. Obviously, post-game shows are a little harder for you because you're doing your job, but if we get another chance with doing the work and just the regular podcast, or sometimes I refer to a DTW Radio, we'll get you back on when we can.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Kathy, I will talk to you Sunday.
Yep.
I know you got to get up early for work, so.
Yep. Sure do. All right. Good night, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye.